it's 10 after, so there were how many groups? How many groups were there, Joshua?
There were 4 groups.
4 groups. So if each can the 4 groups do 2 minutes in their report back, and then we can have something from Karen and something from Tom. I don't know in which order. Maybe Tom and then Karen. What do you think, Claire?
I think we want to have a fuller discussion, and I don't want to put Karen on the spot. So,
all right.
The thing was, if people have questions of Karen about the report, then you can. This is a time you can talk to her.
Okay. So let's see if we can do this. Do our report back. Group 1.
Oh, that's you, Tom. Yeah, that's you, Tom.
Well, I guess I'm up right away. So a few of the things that I think our group were really interested in were, of course, as we were supposed to do, identify our top 3 questions that we thought were really interesting. I want to cover just more than 3. It really is actually, I think, 5 total that we were interested in, which shows that there was a significant amount of overlap between us. Where we did see some overlap was question 1 with the assumption of how many units we're really needing moving forward into the future. I think it was listed 8,000 here. I'm fairly confident that our action plan lists 12,000. Regardless, though, we know that there's a large number of units that we need. The second one that we were really interested in was the assumption that the market and subsidies could solve this problem. And the third was that there are other components that we would want to address or identify within the community. The other 2, I think, that were very interesting to us, but we struggled with and had a little bit of divergence in terms of where we might be able to impact this on a local level. One was incomes. So how can we really move the labor market or incomes when we know that's transboundary and operates on a regional and a national scale? And the other one was carbon. How can we take the issue of housing and begin to address carbon reductions? We know that we have our climate action plan at the city level. We know that states and even regions are beginning to focus on this. But do we really have the ability locally to do so? My view, of course, as you might be able to tell, is I'm somewhat skeptical. We had individuals in our group who felt it was very, very valuable and something to address. And I think it's important to dive in because of that.
Thomas, you have 1 more minute left.
Those were the 5 things. And I think the other focus was that we should have a local development fund that taps perhaps reserves from the University of Oregon was one idea, jobs and skills building, having an educational system that actually supports the effort that we're trying to engage here, having some way to coordinate with other local nonprofit organizations. And I think probably one of the most important things, which is we don't have anybody currently tracking all of the things or any unified information stream that provides information out to all the organizations trying to build from the grassroots level up. And that includes community meetings and reporting back on them.
Great job.
Thank you. Everybody good with 1? Okay.
I might suggest that maybe we could have 3 minutes for every group.
I gave him 3. I did give him 3 minutes.
Yeah, a little more time. Yeah.
Yes, he did get 3 minutes. Okay. Group 2.
One of the things our group noted is, that there is a need is across the spectrum for housing. There's just not much stock out there. And we're kind of straddling this place of late capitalism and then the next wave. And we don't really have the infrastructure in place for this next wave. And we're never going to be able to really get there until we can really see what that next way of living is. As far as meeting the goals of the plan, we thought maybe it would be good to have defined goals of exactly how many units we want to get from each of the solutions so that we could budget accordingly and know where to invest our time. When we looked at the question of ways to generate wealth, we were very interested in looking at state banks as part of the solution, having community financial institutions that can help to invest in housing and build capacity there. We like cooperative enterprise development credit unions. As far as policies for developing to stop speculation, that's a challenging one. We remembered private equity firms buying up a lot of our housing stock during the recession in 2009. And this seems like we really need to find ways so that the good jobs don't come to all the people who are moving here to take them, but instead that we're really creating work for local people. A lot of small businesses have failed during the pandemic. Could cooperative enterprise save them? How do we encourage dollars to circulate in the local economy? All of those things are ways that we can work with stopping speculation. And then last of my time, we also talked about part of affordable housing equation for increasing income. When we're trying to incentivize businesses from coming, we need to link to living wage minimums to make sure that we're getting well-paying jobs if we're incentivizing places. We've seen a lot of places where businesses come, they get an incentive, and then when the incentive runs out, they run out of town too. So for long term, we really see this need for emerging workers and how they think of cooperation and ownership. One of us brought up the Mondragon model out of Spain. We really see a need for community engagement around some of these new ideas in order for us to be able to replace the old.
Thank you. Group 3?
I'm not certain what number I was in because I moved from one to the other, but I think I'm group 3. So I'll do my best to represent that. And I think that, rather than go through everything we discussed, I think the key idea is cooperatization and socialization. So for example, we talked about, things like public land trusts where you can kind of socialize the ownership of land to help reduce costs as opposed to doing it like family by family or individual by individual. How could we do that? We didn't get into the details of like how that would actually be set up, but I'm sure we could dive into that in a deeper way. As an example, another one was how do you shift from socializing the costs of how we currently produce building materials? So we were trying to think up the issue of like, well, don't green materials cost more? But in fact, we don't pay for the true costs of, say, how we are manufacturing dimensional lumber here in town. The communities and neighborhoods around those are paying for it through the air they breathe, through the, shit flown through the soil and the water and so on. So we're currently socializing those costs. We're not paying the true cost. So if we could shift that around, most of the studies I've seen show that a lot of the green materials, especially over the long run, but even in short and medium term, are actually cheaper because we put the burden on production to actually be proper as opposed to making people pay for all that. So that was one thing we kind of talked about that I think was important. And then of course, just getting into things like how do you get the wealthy to pay more in terms of their fair share around taxes and so on. We'll see if Biden's plan to up it to back to 39.7% or whatever it is, helps with that. But really it's about, I think, some of the things people have already mentioned, like when we are attracting jobs or businesses, that needs to be aligned so that the community gets some benefit. The other thing we talked about was one thing that came up was how do we build value added industry? So for instance, how can we incentivize more small and medium farm and agricultural production as an example, but in addition to that, build an infrastructure that value adds what they're producing. So think about like canning of goods and so on, like as a way to create a local community infrastructure of decent paying jobs and having enough of them. So it's not just having a job, but one that pays well. So boosting the infrastructure locally. And then we mentioned that a little bit in housing too, but as an example. The last one that came up in our discussion was the Oregon People's Rebate Initiative. And I'll put the link in the chat about a way to generate income based on corporate involvement in Oregon and how that could flow back to people who could then use it. And then if we are at the same time building local productive capacity, they could be spending that money towards small businesses and locally owned businesses. So that's kind of where we were at, a little bit all over. the place. But I think that the key idea was integration of development and more cooperatization in how we govern and control and own it.
Thanks, great. I think we were group number 4, and we took a deep dive into gentrification and speculation, starting with the premise that you actually want to make speculation not very attractive. There's a Vermont has actually come up with an interesting novel approach to that, where they have very high property taxes, and then those people, then they have a homestead rebate. So people who are living there get most of that back, and people who aren't living there actually have to continue to pay those really high taxes. So that's one way that speculation becomes less interesting and makes it a bad investment. One of our members said that people actually don't, there are laws on the books and that people don't know about. So so there's an education that people need to know what their rights are. Another solution to that is to make affordable housing permanently affordable. That what happens to affordable housing is it's affordable in the beginning, and then it's no longer affordable as gentrification occurs. So through public policy and other mechanisms to make affordable housing permanently affordable. We're looking to have the consent of the local community, including the tribal elders. We want to see speculation avoided by having the local community have more voice in that. And that is, and we get to do that through some transparency around where the money is coming from and how the money is going out. Another solution was to emphasize the time bank, where you can even out the playing field a little bit, where time and money are both of value. Anybody else from the group have anything they want to add? That's what I had in my notes. Okay, thank you. That's the report from group 4.
Well, another thing I suggested was that since the money center banks are principally responsible for the continual increase in housing prices by their creation of money, decade after century after century, that the least we could do would be to require the money center banks branches here in Eugene, that would be Wells Fargo, Chase, KeyBank, that they should be required to tell us, at least in general statistics, how much money is coming into the city or the region and how much money is going out, with just some general categories. We're not like asking for a great release of private information, but they know the entire economy. They've got the whole thing completely mapped out in their big data systems. And the least that they could do for us is to tell us some general ideas about the economy in Eugene.
Thank you. Okay.
So does anybody have general questions for Karen about the report? If not, she's off the hook.
And thank you so much for being here. Yeah, really great work, and thanks for being here.
Hey, folks, could I just take 30 seconds to chime in?
Go ahead, please.
And just, first of all, really appreciate this conversation and so much work that's gone into so many of you working on so many important initiatives. And I just wanted to say, the county commissioners, the county as an organization, and your current board are working on many of these issues you brought up, not just housing specifically, but these broader issues around economic opportunity and what kind of development we want to see in our community, and working on our climate action plan and the intersectionality of all these issues around income, climate, housing, and more. And so I'm just really encouraging y'all to get on the county website and cruise around there. We're also doing have a real commitment to equity and racial equity. We just passed a resolution declaring racism a public health threat. and have an equity program where all of our resolutions and policies will be sent through this equity lens before we pass them. And all our meetings are public. There's public comment sections every time. And we do a once a month evening public comment because our regular board meetings are weekdays during the day, and that doesn't work for everyone. So just encouraging you to get on the county website, learn who your commissioner is and communicate with them, and sign up for agenda alerts. And please give us public comments so we can hear from you on the issues that we're working on. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Lori.
Thank you.
I think the county is underappreciated to the role it plays in our lives.
Well, and I think that's right. We touch on almost every aspect of folks' lives, and they don't always realize it's county government doing it. And in housing in particular, we play a unique role because our focus is so much on permanent supported housing. So not just the construction of the housing itself, but housing with the services that people need to stay in their homes. So again, appreciate you all. Thanks so much for sharing the invitation to this with me.
Oh, Karen, you had another thought?
Oh, I just listening to the commissioner made me realize that there's two thoughts I could offer, just, additional springboards for your discussions. One is just observing something aloud that we have seen not characterized so broadly in different conversations. And that's that the Affordable Housing Action Plan as a collection of proposals really seeks to engage the full breadth of agents who might be impacting housing or working to address our housing crisis in the community. So in its adoption meeting, one of the commissioners characterized it as being all public sector, all government side. That's absolutely not the case. In another conversation, I've seen it characterized as being all private sector, all market rate, and all capitalism. And that's also absolutely not the case. Where the work that we're doing is really striving to actually, move us in some different directions. And into some new, ways of acting and programs. So wanted to throw that out there. And then one other thought, because so many ideas have come up this evening. But Heather mentioned one of these programs at the outset. The Affordable Housing Action Plan as put forward also does not capture into it in all of those, recommendation categories, work that we are currently doing and is ongoing in different areas of the county and cities. So Heather mentioned the recommendations in the plan around ADUs. We've been working intensively with the city of Eugene to get a pre-approved ADU path and plans adopted into our permitting process, and other commissioners at the county level have had some really creative ideas about scaling up that kind of a resource. And ideally, Better Housing Together as a housing advocacy organization would like to see those kinds of resources be uniformly available throughout our whole community. So not just Eugene, not just Springfield, but really everyone within the reach of our county. So that's one of the reasons they're included in there, but I just wanted to flag that as an example, because sometimes people will look at the plan and say, oh, well, this doesn't talk about this housing or this housing or this housing. And it's because those buckets or action items are moving forward in their own channels. And our work was really trying to focus more on other things and new things that the county should be doing.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen and Lori, for your work as well. And everybody's thinking and creativity in this discussion. We would like to invite you to continue to contribute to the design challenge. And if you are interested in that, to send me a note in the chat or on email. You probably have gotten an email from me before. And I also put in the chat an announcement that tonight at 6:30, there's an Equitable Building Peace Village BIPOC Forum, and it's on Zoom, and the Zoom information is in the chat. This is through Square One Villages. Any last comments before we fade into the Ethernet?